The Crime of the Century. Leopold and Loeb's Fatal Experiment. Imagine two wealthy young men, brilliant minds with every privilege in the world, deciding that life and even human existence was merely a game. What happens when curiosity, arrogance, and a twisted philosophy collide? This is the story of Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb and the shocking crime that became known as the crime of the century. Nathan Leopold was only 19 years old, but he had already earned a reputation as a child prodigy. He spoke multiple languages, was fascinated with philosophy, and had immersed himself in the writings of Friedrich Nietzsche. He clung to the idea of the Übermensch, or Superman, a figure so superior that ordinary morality, laws, and societal norms simply did not apply. His companion, Richard Loeb, was 18, handsome, wealthy, and equally intelligent, though more restless and thrill-seeking than his friend. Loeb was charming, but consumed with the desire for adventure and risk. Together, their bond was dangerous. Leopold's intellectual arrogance fueled Loeb's craving for excitement, and Loeb's daring fed Leopold's belief that the two of them were untouchable. In their minds, they were destined for greatness, but instead of pursuing creation or innovation, they turned their brilliance toward destruction. The plan began as an idea, an experiment in proving that they were above humanity itself. They wanted to commit the perfect crime, something so audacious and flawlessly executed that the world would never trace it back to them. For months they prepared, obsessing over details. They needed a victim who would be young, easy to lure, and unlikely to fight back. They needed a method that was quick, efficient, and left no trail. They selected a chisel as their weapon, and they rehearsed every step. To them, this was not about money or revenge. It was about power, control, and testing the boundaries of morality. On May 21st, 1924, their fantasy became reality. That afternoon, Richard Loeb spotted his 14-year-old neighbor and distant cousin, Bobby Franks, walking home from a baseball game. Because Bobby knew Loeb, he didn't hesitate when the older boy offered him a ride. Once Bobby was inside the car, the two struck. Loeb grabbed the chisel and struck Bobby in the head, but the boy resisted. In the struggle, they gagged him, stuffing rags down his throat until he suffocated. Within minutes, Bobby Franks was dead. Their perfect crime was only beginning. They drove his lifeless body to a culvert near Wolf Lake, where they doused his face and body with acid, hoping to obscure his identity. Then, as if following a script, they mailed a ransom note to Bobby's family, pretending it was a kidnapping. They demanded money, not because they needed it, but because it added another layer of deception to their carefully crafted plan. To them, Bobby was no longer a boy with a family. He was simply a pawn in their intellectual experiment. But arrogance has a way of unraveling even the most careful schemes. Leopold dropped his eyeglasses near the body, an expensive custom-made pair that could be traced directly to him. The ransom plan was poorly executed, intercepted before it could even unfold. Within days, the police connected the evidence, and suspicion fell on the two young men. Under questioning, the facade crumbled. Leopold and Loeb, who once believed they were superior beings, turned on one another, each trying to shift the blame. Their carefully constructed illusion of brilliance collapsed in the face of reality. The trial that followed captivated the nation. Newspapers called it the crime of the century. The idea that two privileged, brilliant young men, sons of wealthy Chicago families, could coldly plan and carry out the murder of a child horrified the public. Their families hired the legendary defense attorney Clarence Darrow, who understood that the evidence against them was overwhelming. Instead of arguing innocence, Darrow built his case around saving them from execution. He painted them as mentally unstable, too young, too impressionable, and too consumed by dangerous philosophies to fully comprehend their actions. Darrow's closing argument became one of the most famous speeches in American legal history. For 12 hours over 3 days, he begged the judge to spare their lives. He argued that hanging them would not bring Bobby Franks back, that executing them would only perpetuate violence. The world held its breath as the decision was made. Finally, the judge sentenced both young men to life in prison plus 99 years. They had been spared the gallows, but their lives of privilege and arrogance were over. Prison, however, did not offer redemption. In 1936, Richard Loeb was attacked and killed by another inmate, stabbed repeatedly in the showers. Headlines were merciless, mocking his death. Nathan Leopold, on the other hand, lived until 1971. After decades in prison, he was paroled and moved to Puerto Rico, where he tried to rebuild his life as a teacher and medical technician. He sought normalcy, but he never escaped the shadow of what he had done. The story of Leopold and Loeb remains one of the most chilling reminders of what can happen when intellect and privilege are warped by arrogance and moral emptiness. They believed they were untouchable, that they could take a life simply because they wanted to. But the truth was that their very humanity, their mistakes, their vanity, their hubris, was exactly what led to their downfall. What they called a perfect crime was nothing more than a tragic experiment, one that ended in the loss of an innocent boy's life and destroyed their own in the process. Nearly a century later, the chilling arrogance of Leopold and Loeb continues to echo as a cautionary tale. They wanted to rise above morality, to prove themselves superior, but instead they became infamous not for brilliance, but for cruelty. The crime of the century was no triumph of intellect. It was a fatal experiment that revealed just how fragile the line is between genius and monstrosity. And that concludes the chilling tale of Leopold and Loeb, the so-called perfect crime that was anything but. If you found this story haunting and thought-provoking, make sure to subscribe for more journeys into the dark corners of history and human nature. Your support means the world to me, and it helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.